What's up, adventurers? My name is Platinum Phoenix, and welcome to the Colosseum Bios episode. So, throughout my Colosseum Let's Play, I made bios for each and every obtainable Pokemon that is within Colosseum to give my thoughts on the Pokemon and give strategies and what I think about each Pokemon. And I wanted to make this video not only to be like a time capsule of what I thought about all of these Pokemon, but also just be a very convenient way for anyone who wants to come and see what I thought about each of the Pokemon, or see what strategies I would think of for each of the Pokemon, or anything like that. And I wanted to make it as easy as possible to find all those without having to watch a 30-part series. But with that being said, I do have to mention that I did switch audio softwares about 6 episodes into the Let's Play. So, for the first 10 or so Pokemon of these bios, they sound very full and round in sound, and I actually fixed that after that point to where they sound a lot clearer and not sounding like I was in a wind tunnel while recording them. So I just wanted to bring that up so you know why the first couple of them sound so much different and so much weirder than the rest of the bios after that point. But with that being said, if you like this style of episode, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel to let me know. And without further ado, on to the bios. The first thing I want to look at is actually the starting moveset of the Pokemon. And the reason that this may be confusing is because it's not really helpful for Espeon and Umbreon, because you could just go into their info within the Pokemon tab and look at their starting moveset and everything. But I want you to trust me that it becomes very important information for later on in the game, and it's why I'm including it for all of the bios, because it will be important. But the other main thing I want to point out of these bios is actually the weakness chart, because in this game, more than any other game that I can think of, besides maybe the sequel to this game, there are more attacks happening in each turn. So it is extremely important to know about what type your Pokemon are weak to in order to know what to look out for and to know what attacks your Pokemon can take without needing to really worry about them. But with all of that being said, let's get into the bios for the starters, starting with Espeon, who is the more offensive of the two starters, with much higher special attacks than Umbreon, meaning that it is able to just output more damage than Umbreon overall, being that they are both special attackers. It also gets access to powerful Psychic type moves, which is great because there are a lot of fighting and poison types within this game. And it being a pure Psychic type is actually to its benefit as well, because being that this is a Gen 3 game, there aren't really that many Dark types to worry about, meaning that there's not a whole lot in this game that is straight up immune to Psychic types. So firing off a powerful Psychic move is a really viable strategy, honestly. And if you wanted to use a Psychic type that wasn't Espeon, you literally only have 2 other options in the entire game. So Espeon may just be your best option, and it being one of your starters, you get it super early, it's super powerful, and it's really one of the best Pokemon in the game. And also, it's not just an attacker if you want to use it. It also has really good supportive capabilities as well, having both Reflect and Helping Hand in its starting moveset, allowing it to just be really good at supporting your allies and boosting both defense and attack powers of said allies. But with that being said, next up is Umbreon. And if Espeon is the more offensive of the two, that means Umbreon is the more defensive of the two, having much higher defense and special defense than Espeon has, which basically just means it's able to live a lot longer during battles and is able to take more super effective hits than its Espeon counterpart. It also means that its ability Synchronize is much better on it, just because since it is living longer, it is more likely to become status. And if it is status, Synchronize statuses your opponent with the same status. So living longer just allows it to have a better Synchronize ability. But even with that, it has good moves as well, with moves like Taunt in its starting moveset, basically allowing you to avoid situations of your opponents basically ignoring its defenses, by making it so that they cannot use any non-attacking moves, which is very nice for certain battles within the game. Also, the main trade-off for Umbreon is that it doesn't really learn any stellar moves in the combat variety, or in the damage dealing variety, I guess I should say. It starts off with Bite, and it only learns one other Dark-type move, but unfortunately that other Dark-type move has the exact same power as Bite, so you're basically stuck with Bite for this entire playthrough, which is really unfortunate. When you think about the power of Bite only being 60, so you're stuck with basically a 60 power move. But similarly to Espeon, the number of Dark-type Pokemon are limited within the game, and there are only 5 of them in the entire game, and 2 of them are right before the final fight of the main story. So if you really want to use a Dark-type, again, Umbreon might just be your best option out of the 3 that are available. Oh, Makuhita is honestly just a fantastic first Pokemon to get. It is a pure fighting type, which means it either has a neutral or a resistant matchup to every single type that Espeon and Umbreon are weak to. And also, since Makuhita is a pure fighting type, it means it is a physical attacker, which is a great complement to both of the special attackers of Umbreon and Espeon. It also gets access to some really good moves like Belly Drum later in its life when it is able to level up. And Belly Drum just allows it to cut its HP in half in order to maximize its attack power. And it's just a really good move for a physical attacker. But the main downside to Makuhita, and actually to all of the Pokemon with Dark Auras, is they can't actually level up right now since they have the Dark Aura around them. It basically caps their level at whatever you find them at. So, if you were thinking, hey, I'm going to catch this Makuhita to evolve it immediately, since Makuhita evolves at level 30, you can't actually do that, because you can't actually level it up to get it to evolve right now. So you have to think about that as well. But the other main downside specifically to Makuhita here is that it doesn't actually learn any other moves other than normal and fighting type, unless you want to use TMs on it. So if you are going to use it, you are using it strictly for basically just the fighting moves, and that is it. But it's really powerful in that goal anyway. Which means first up is Quilava, which might sound blasphemous, but in my opinion, Quilava is the worst of the 3 starters in this game. And it's mainly due to Quilava's moveset, actually. Quilava is the only one of the 3 Johto starters that does not get a spread move at all during its lifetime. On top of that, Flamethrower is Quilava's best move, and it doesn't actually get Flamethrower until level 54. And that's if you keep it a Quilava. If you evolve it into Typhlosion, it's not until level 60. And the only other way to get Flamethrower before that point is to do a bunch of tedious work in a side mode of the game in order to buy the TM, which, like I just said, is pretty tedious. And also, more on that point, we can't even level up these Pokemon right now, meaning that you're stuck with Flame Wheel for a long time, which is not a great move in all honesty. But the good about Quilava is that it actually is probably the best or second best fire type in the game, depending on what your criteria is for judging Pokemon in this game. But Quilava has really good speed and it has really good special attack, meaning that it will normally go first and it will hit pretty powerfully with the fire type moves that it gets, as well as the fact that Quilava gets the move Smokescreen in its opening or in its starting moveset, meaning that it is helpful for snagging Pokemon almost immediately because it allows you to kind of just sit in battle and lower the Pokemon with Dark Aura's accuracy, making it so that you are able to just sit there for longer while throwing Pokeballs at it. But next up, the second best of the starters, in my opinion, is Bayleef. And Bayleef is easily the tankiest of the three Johto starters, which is good for the same reason that Quilava having Smokescreen is good, because it just allows it to sit in front of your opponent and kind of just soak up attack. It also makes it really easy to switch in to take an attack for an ally that you don't want to be taking attack. Bayleef also gets access to Razor Leaf in its starting moveset, which is a spread move that hits both of your opponents and has a high critical hit chance, which makes it actually a really good grass type option, especially when you look at the other grass type moves within this game. The biggest downside to Bayleef is that it's weak to Bug, and the reason that's a downside is because if you keep both of your starters and add Bayleef to your team, that is half of your team that is weak to Bug in a game where you use a good chunk of your team in every battle. So having multiple Pokemon with the same weakness is just not great, honestly. And saving the best for last is Croconaw. Croconaw has stats that land right in the middle of the other two Pokemon that we just talked about, or the other two starters, I guess I should say. Meaning that it doesn't actually excel in any one thing, but is actually very well-rounded as a Pokemon, which is very helpful because it makes it very flexible. Croconaw also has Surf in its starting moveset, meaning that it gets a really good spread move, a 95 base power water move, very quickly. And I would say it's probably the second best spread move in the entire game, so getting it super quickly is very nice. Also, this is Gen 3, as I've said several times the last few episodes. So Surf only hits your opponents and it doesn't hit your allies like it does in Gen 4 onward. So it makes Surf even a better move to have this early on in the game. Other than that, the biggest downside to Croconaw is that its stat spread is not perfect. It has higher attack than special attack, and due to it being a water type in Gen 3, it will be using its special attack a lot more than its attack to use Surf, which is a real big downside. But Croconaw does have two big things that help it to negate this downside a little bit. The first is that it gets Rain Dance, which actually allows it to help power up its water type moves, which is very helpful to kind of negate the lower special attack. But also, Eagle Eye viewers may have noticed that all three of these starters actually have items when you catch them, and these items are the items that boost the type of moves that the Pokemon are. So in Croconaw's case, it has the Mystic Water, which helps to boost water type moves, meaning that whenever it uses Surf, it will get the boost from both Rain Dance if Rain Dance is up, as well as the Mystic Water, which is really helpful. Flaaffy! Anyone who has ever played through a Johto game knows Flaaffy and has probably used a Flaaffy, because they are one of the best Pokemon in Johto, just straight up. But Flaaffy is a unique electric type Pokemon, being more of a slower and bulkier electric type rather than the fast and frail electric types that you might be used to. But because of that, it makes Flaaffy an amazing supportive electric type and one of the best speed controllers in the game. And what I mean by that is that Flaaffy has several ways to actually lower or control when another Pokemon or your opponent can move, with moves like Thunder Wave, like it just did on me, or Cotton Spore, which are both in its starting moveset. So it has several ways to just kind of tank the speed of your opponent, which is very nice because it allows you to go first, which actually allows you to kind of control which opponents are able to even move on their turn. But Flaaffy is also pretty good at dealing damage. It has a decent special attack stat, and it gets Thunder Shock fairly quickly after you catch it here and use it for a while. The unfortunate thing is that Thunderbolt is locked behind its Shadow Rush slot, which means that because it is a Pokemon with a dark aura, you have to go through a bunch of hoops in order to unlock that slot, so you won't have access to Thunderbolt for a while, and you have to just deal with Thunder Shock until then. And that's the only big downside I can think about its starting moveset. But because it is in its starting moveset, even if you have to wait a while, you don't have to do a bunch of grinding, and you don't have to do a bunch of side stuff in order to get Thunderbolt, which is a big upside for it. Next up is Misdreavus, and this is the first example of a Pokemon that would be several times better if Colosseum came out one generation later, since Mismagius simply doesn't exist in this game. So if you're using Misdreavus, you are stuck with Misdreavus. But if you want to use a Ghost type, this is literally your only option in the game, since this is the only Ghost type that is snaggable within Colosseum as a whole. But saying that, the Ghost type is actually Misdreavus' biggest strength, as well as its biggest weakness. It's a strength because the Ghost typing allows Misdreavus to have immunities to both Ghost and Normal type boosts, and along with its ability Levitate, it brings it up to 3 immunities since it is immune to Fighting, Normal, and Ground type moves. And because NPCs in this game aren't the smartest in the world, they really like to try to attack Misdreavus with all 3 of those types of moves, making it so Misdreavus ends up not taking a lot of damage very often. But the reason that Ghost is a weakness for Misdreavus is because since we're in Gen 3, Ghost is a physical type, and Misdreavus is a special attacker, meaning that Misdreavus is using its worst attacking stat when using its Ghost type moves, which is really a negative for Misdreavus overall. But moving on, next up is Slugma. And Slugma is the replacement for Quilava if you didn't catch it over in Fennec, since it is the only fire-type Pokemon for a while after this. But going over Slugma specifically, it is slow. It is outsped by pretty much anything that you are fighting for a majority of the game, which makes it pretty difficult to use effectively. You really have to invest in pretty heavy speed control or use redirection in order to get the most out of Slugma, since NPCs in this game love to just attack Slugma because it's the easy thing to do. Slugma also gets Yawn in its starting moveset, which is actually a big benefit for it because it makes it a really decent option for snagging other Pokemon, since it allows it to put them to sleep, and sleep is the best multiplier in order to catch Pokemon, instead of using paralysis or poison or anything like that. But also, I have a personal story with Slugma and its evolved form Magcargo, because I used both of them in my research playthrough for this game, and while it was a struggle to use them, it was also really fun because they were basically just magnets for attacks, which made it almost like a pseudo redirection move in and of itself, because you could use a move called Protect to protect it, and your opponents just love to attack into the Slugma slot. So it allows you to make it live a lot longer than it would, and it allows its allies to do a lot more damage and also survive a lot longer, just because you're playing around the fact that Slugma likes to get attacked. But moving on from Slugma, next up is Quagsire. And Quagsire is the replacement for Croconaw, if you didn't catch it. But unlike Slugma, there's actually quite a few water types coming up, so Quagsire isn't your only option. But Quagsire might be the best option because it has an amazing type, being both offensively and defensively really good, because the only type it's really afraid of, in both sense, is grass, being only resisted by grass and also only being weak to grass. So basically, if you're using Quagsire, avoid grass at all opportunities. Quagsire also has a great move pool, having Surf in its starting moveset and getting Earthquake at level 42, which, again, I have to reiterate, we can't actually level up these Pokemon right now, but we will be able to in the future, so knowing certain moves in the future is beneficial, even if we can't get to them right now. But I will say Quagsire's biggest weakness is that it is also a special attacker with a higher physical attack stat. So because you are using Surf most of the time with Quagsire starting off, you are attacking with its least effective attacking stat. Again, for a while. It's kind of like Croconaw in that sense. Also, Quagsire is pretty slow, only having 15 more points in its speed than Slugma, but I wouldn't actually call that a weakness, since it has really good defensive and that great typing that I talked about. But next up, after Quagsire, is Skiploom. And Skiploom, rounding out the trio of Fire, Water, Grass, is the replacement for Bayleef if you didn't catch it. And it is the first Pokemon that I am going to straight up say is really hard to use. Because of a few reasons, actually. It has straight up bad typing, having 5 weaknesses, those being Fire, Ice, Poison, Flying, and Rock. 3 of those, Fire, Ice, and Rock, being very often used attacking types, so you have to watch out for those. Skiploom also never learns a new move after catching it. Even after you get the ability to level it up, it literally learns nothing. So if you want new moves, you have to use TMs on it. It also only has one good stat, being its speed stat, which is very funny because its only ability also raises its speed. So you have a semi-fast Pokemon getting faster by its ability and nothing else, which I just think is pretty funny. And the best option I can think of to use Skiploom, if you really want to use Skiploom, is to use it as sort of like a fast crowd control type of Pokemon on a Sun team. Because you can pair it with Pokemon like Quilava or Slugma, who have Sunny Day, to unlock Skiploom's Chlorophyll, and then use moves like Sleep Powder and Attract to control which opponent's Pokemon are able to move and to really lock down your opponent before they're able to move on their turn. Also, using Sunny Day unlocks Skiploom's best move, which is Solar Beam, but I will warn you, if you want to use that, if you want to use Solar Beam on Skiploom, you have to jump through a couple of hoops to actually get the TM to teach it. And last up, the last new Pokemon here is Noctowl. And Noctowl is our first flying type option. And it actually has pretty good support moves to be a decent supportive Pokemon, starting with both Hypnosis and Reflect in its starting move pool, making it one of the better Pokemon for snagging other Pokemon, because like I said earlier, putting Pokemon to sleep is the best method for making them easier to catch. But unfortunately, that's where the positives kind of end for Noctowl, because once again, I feel like a broken record, but it uses the wrong attacking stat for both of its types. It has higher special attack than physical attack, but both normal and flying moves are physical moves in this game, meaning that it is a lot weaker than it would initially appear, just because its stats are wrong for the type of Pokemon it is in this game. And it's kind of unfortunate for it. Oh, it is a Furret. And this is gonna sound really weird, but Furret's actually a pretty good Pokemon in Colosseum. Mostly due to the fact that it is a normal type, and normal types are notorious for having really good move pools. And Furret is no exception, learning moves like Shadow Ball and Brick Break, although you have to use TMs in order to actually make Furret's moves a variety of types. But something really nice about Furret is that it starts with Strength in its opening moveset, which is an 80 base power move with which is Stab for Furret, basically making it a 120 power base move, which is extremely good for this early in the game. But even if you don't want to use Furret for offense, it is actually a pretty decent supporting Pokemon as well, since it has Helping Hand in its starting moveset as well, which Helping Hand allows it to boost up its allies' power for a turn in exchange for it not being able to attack. But even more than that, whenever Furret is able to level up later in the game, it is able to get a move called Follow Me. And Follow Me is what is called a redirection move, and basically it allows Furret to redirect any of your opponent's attacks onto itself, basically keeping its allies safe for a turn, which is really nice if you're using slower Pokemon that you want to have make status effects happen, like Flaaffy with Thunder Wave or Slugma with Yawn. Having a redirection move is basically just like using Protect on the Pokemon, but it allows them to still use a move, which is very nice. The only caveat I would say for using Furret is that if you want to use Furret, make sure it has the Keen Eye ability, because its other ability is Runaway, and Runaway only works in wild Pokemon battles, but since Colosseum is only trainer battles, Runaway literally does nothing. So if you are wanting to use Furret, just make sure it has Keen Eye. It's so much better and so much easier to use Furret if it actually has an ability. And we were just at the Colosseum right before this, so you should have saved before coming here. In Yanma! And Yanma is disappointing, is the best way I could put it. And that's coming from somebody who actually likes Yanma. But in this game, it's just so bad. It has a bad typing in Bug and Flying, having 5 very common weaknesses. It has bad moves, learning literally no Bug-type moves and having to wait till level 43 in order to get its only Flying-type move in Wing Attack, meaning that it relies very heavily on TMs to actually get any type of good moves on it. The only exception to this is Detect, which is in its starting moveset, but even that can be seen as a negative because it's behind the Shadow Rush slot, meaning that it has to wait a while to actually get access to that move. On top of that, even if Yanma got good moves, it just has no stats to back them up. Considering its only good stat is speed, it has decent attack, and then everything else is bad. Which is bad on Yanma, considering both Bug and Flying are physical types. Meaning that Yanma, even if it got moves, couldn't really use them. And the sad thing about Yanma is that all of this could have been avoided if Colosseum just came out 1 generation later. Because the worst part about Yanma is that it is a Yanma, and that it cannot turn into a Yanmega, since Yanmega does not exist in Generation 3. And like I said, Yanma is just such a disappointing Pokemon in this game. In Remoraid! And Remoraid's actually a good Pokemon, if you can get past its one glaring weakness. It's level 20! I have no idea why they made this thing level 20, since even the first Pokemon we captured, Makuhita, was level 30. And basically every single fight we've done has been level 30 and above, so I have no idea why this thing is level 20. And because of that, it makes it really difficult to both recommend and to use Remoraid. But if you can look past that very glaring weakness, Remoraid actually is a good Pokemon. It has good stats with being a decent mix attacker. Although I should mention that it only learns special moves, so you have to keep that into account, so it won't be using its physical attack all too often. But even though it starts with really good moves, knowing Bubble Beam, Psybeam, and Aurora Beam in its starting moveset, which is a really good starting moveset. The only downside to its starting moveset is that it has Bubble Beam instead of Surf, meaning that since HMs don't exist in Colosseum, it will never be able to have a spread status or spread stab move, like Surf or something of that nature. The other real bad thing about Remoraid, other than its level 20-ness, is that it has a bad ability in Hustle, because like I mentioned, it only gets good special attacks, or it only gets special attacks, meaning that Hustle, instead of raising attack power and lowering accuracy, raises nothing and just lowers accuracy for the payoff of nothing, which is, in my opinion, a pretty bad trade-off. And I will say that that issue of Hustle is resolved as soon as Remoraid evolves, but since it takes so long for it to get up in levels to evolve, it's going to be a problem for a while because, again, it's level 20, but in Mantine this time. And Mantine I can actually recommend, unlike Remoraid in the last battle, because Mantine has a good typing in Water and Flying, which only has 2 weaknesses to Rock and Electric, although the Electric is a 4x weakness, so you do have to be careful of that. But the combination of Water and Flying also hits every single type in the game for at least neutral damage, which is very nice, meaning that it will basically never be resisted. The real downside to Mantine is that it has a bad attack stat, meaning that its flying moves aren't really going to be doing much damage at all, and it's just something you have to keep in mind. But the trade-off for that is that it has an amazing special defense stat. This is probably the most special defensive tank that we have seen so far in the game, and that's coming from somebody using Umbreon, which is also a really good special defensive tank. But other than that, Mantine's stats are pretty middling, honestly. But to make up for that, it does have 2 pretty great abilities, and you could pick either one, and both of them are super helpful. It just matters if you would rather have another immunity in Water Absorb, or if you would like to make Mantine a literal jet with Swift Swim. Also, I should mention, if it does have Swift Swim, in the rain it gets double the speed and it powers up its water type moves. So I might actually recommend getting Swift Swim over Water Absorb, just because of how powerful it can be within the rain. The other big downside that Mantine has is actually it has the same problem as Remoraid, is that it starts with Bubble Beam and not Surf, meaning that it will not have a stab move or a stab spread move, like Remoraid before it. So it struggles with getting good moves, and it struggles with the fact that its flying moves aren't great. Qwilfish! And Qwilfish is interesting, because it's not the type of Pokemon I would normally recommend. But in Colosseum, Qwilfish is actually pretty good, honestly. It has Surf in its starting moveset, meaning that it has a pretty good spread move starting out, and it also gets Swift Swim as an ability, meaning that it can act very well in a rain team, allowing it to double its speed and power up its Surf. It also is holding the Poison Barb item, which allows it to power up its Poison type moves, which it only starts with Poison Sting, but it will be a more powerful Poison Sting than other Poison types, simply because it is holding that Poison Barb item, so it allows it to have more power. So, the only real downsides that Qwilfish has is that its special attack is not great. In fact, it's its worst stat, making Surf worse on it. and it relies pretty heavily on TMs for good physical moves. But it does get good moves from using TMs. Moves like Shadow Ball and Sludge Bomb, which I will say I highly recommend getting for it if you plan on using Qwilfish on your team at all. Just because they're really good moves on Qwilfish. The other main downside that Qwilfish has is actually more of a double-edged sword type of thing, and it's just the fact that it is a poison type in Colosseum. And what I mean by that is that poison types have a lot of resistances. In fact, I believe Qwilfish has 6 or 7 different resistances, which is really nice. But being a poison type also means it is weak to ground types, which is probably the worst type in the game to be weak to. Mostly due to the fact that Earthquake exists, and it's probably the best move in the game. And the AI later in the game loves to spam Earthquake, so you have to be careful about when you use Qwilfish, because it will just be knocked out by a rogue Earthquake without any, protection or anything like that. Which is Meditite! And Meditite is, again, another interesting Pokemon here, being a weirdly good defensive type of Fighting and Psychic. And I say that because it only has 2 weaknesses to Flying and Ghost, and there aren't a whole ton of Ghost types in this game to worry about. And talking about its stats, Meditite is actually a pretty competent mixed attacker, although looking at its stats just as itself may not first appear that way. But it has the ability Pure Power, which actually doubles its attack stat, effectively giving it a 100 in its attack stat right off the bat as soon as you catch it, which is actually really nice. And even though it only has a 50 in its special attack stat, it starts with Calm Mind in its starting moveset, which allows you to boost its special attack, and it has the Twisted Spoon held item. So it also helps to boost up its attack just by holding that, or special attack, just by holding that item and using Psychic type moves, which it is most likely to be doing if you are special attacking with it. The only real downsides that Meditite has is that it relies pretty heavily on TMs to get moves that are outside of Fighting and Psychic type. And even when you use it, even when you use TMs, it doesn't have the biggest move pool, so you have to keep that in mind. And also, if you are trying to use it for anything other than attacking, it's not great just because of its stats being fairly low as a Meditite, and it taking a while to actually evolve once you get the ability to actually level it up. Shadow Dunsparce is, again, another disappointing Pokemon. I do have to bring up that this is before Dunsparce gets more suspenseful, aka there's no Dunsparce in this game. So you have to use it as it is, which is not great. There's a reason that people have wanted a Dunsparce evolution for literally years. But let's talk about the good of Dunsparce, because there is actually good about the Pokemon. It has Serene Grace as its ability, which is an amazing ability, because what it does is it basically takes the secondary type, or secondary effects of moves, and doubles the chance that they are able to go off. The only downside to that is that Dunsparce's moveset for what it can use for Serene Grace is very limited. And to show that, I'm going to list every single move that gets a Serene Grace boost. Ice Beam and Blizzard gets a Serene Grace boost with the chance to freeze. Thunderbolt and Thunder with their chance to paralyze. Flamethrower and Fire Blast with their chance to burn. And then Iron Tail and Shadow Ball with their chances of lowering either defense or special defense of the opponent. Which, also, I should bring up, almost all of those are reliant on TMs in order for Dunsparce to even be able to use them. So it's a kind of a hard sell to actually be like, hey, use Dunsparce and give it all these cool moves so it can get these boosts. You just have to spend a egregious amount of money, or like half of your lifetime, in order to grind up enough points in something later in order to actually get those moves. The other good thing about Dunsparce is it has decent stats. I wouldn't call them great under any means, and it's very slow for a Pokemon that isn't great in most circumstances anyway. But it at least has enough stats to be able to effectively be used as an attacker. It also is a normal type, meaning it's only weak to fighting, which is actually an upside as well. So I would recommend, if you plan on using Dunsparce, the best strategy that I could come up with for it is to use it on a rain team, which actually makes it a fairly good team member. Because on a rain team, you can give it Thunder, and in rain, Thunder has a 100% accuracy, which means you have a move that is 100% accurate with a 60% chance to paralyze. That is 120 base power. That's insane. If you also give it Shadow Ball and Iron Tail, whenever it is not under rain, you can use it to basically lower the defenses of your opponents to allow your other attacking Pokemon to actually have decent attacking times, because they are basically battling with nerfed opponents, which is, like I said, probably the best use of Dunsparce that I can personally think of. And Swablu is interesting because it is a normal flying type with pretty bad stats that turns into a really bulky mixed attacking dragon and flying type. So I would say that it is very much an investment type Pokemon, where it's not going to be amazing starting off, but if you put in the time to actually get it to the point where it can level up and become Altaria, it becomes a really good Pokemon. The other thing is that Swablu here is actually the easiest Pokemon in the game to catch other than Makuhita, because it's the only Pokemon in the game that has a 255 catch rate, which I just find interesting. But also, Swablu has both Sing and Safeguard, which are in its starting moveset, and are really nice because it allows you to both protect your team from status effects, as well as put your opponents to sleep. And sleep is one of the most powerful status effects in terms of catching Pokemon. The only real downside, other than you having to kind of put in a lot of effort to use Swablu, is that it doesn't really have a great move pool. It has very limiting options. And what I mean by that is that it just doesn't get a lot of moves. The only exception to that is that it gets Dragon Dance at level 40, which is an amazing move on Swablu, just because it uses stuff like Fly, and using Dragon Dance both powers up its attack and its speed, making it a real powerhouse sweeper with Fly and with other physical moves, which is very nice for it. So, Sudowoodo is kind of weird. Let's start with the good, I guess I should say. It has a great attack and a great defense stat, both being over 100 in its base stat, which is amazing. It also has Rock Slide in its starting moveset, meaning that it just gets to use a spread rock type move basically from the beginning, which is also very nice. On top of that, it is holding the Hard Stone held item, which boosts its rock type moves even farther, allowing its Rock Slide to just be incredibly powerful going off of its attack stat and the held item, making it just a really powerful physical rock type attacker. But that's honestly where the positives of Sudowoodo end. And the bad start. So, Sudowoodo is a rock type, which is bad in this game for two reasons. Those two reasons being Surf and Earthquake, which it is weak to both of them, and those are probably the two worst moves in the game to be weak to, because they are probably the two most dangerous moves in the game. So it has to really look out if it's fighting anything that can use Surf or anything that can use Earthquake. It's also really slow with a base speed stat of 30, meaning that it's going to get outsped by a lot of different Pokemon, and that mixed up with the fact that it is weak to quite a few types makes it pretty hard to use. The other thing that makes it hard to use is its abilities, which are both basically useless on it. Sturdy in this generation is not the Sturdy you are probably used to, because before 5th generation, Sturdy only blocked one-hit KO moves like Sheer Cold or Fissure, and doesn't allow it to live any move when at full health. So Sturdy basically does nothing. But Rockhead also basically does nothing, because what Rockhead does is it protects it from recoil moves, basically allowing you to use a recoil move without taking the recoil damage. But there's two caveats to that. The first is that Shadow Rush is not considered a recoil move for the purposes of Rockhead, so you cannot block recoil with the Rockhead ability. So that means Sudowoodo learns one move that can be blocked by Rockhead, being Double Edge, which is a good move, honestly, and honestly makes me say that Rockhead is the better ability on it, because you're basically trading a almost useless ability for an ability that works as soon as you get Double Edge, but only works for Double Edge. So it's kind of two abilities that are useless until you get Double Edge. Is Plusle. And Plusle is one of the very few non-shadow Pokemon in this game that you can obtain. And it's an interesting Pokemon. On the good side, it is a fast support Pokemon, learning both Thunder Wave and Helping Hand in its starting moveset. And later on, it will learn moves like Encore, Fake Tears, and Baton Pass through leveling up. So it gets really good moves just by leveling up. It also can get moves like Light Screen and Rain Dance through TM, which makes it amazing on rain teams, which I feel like I've been saying a lot lately. The main downside to Plusle, however, is 1, its stats are pretty low for a fully evolved Pokemon, and 2, it starts at level 13, which is the lowest of every Pokemon we've seen in the entire game, and it's absurd that they expect you to use something that is so low leveled. The only thing that makes up for it is that Plusle is not a Shadow Pokemon, so it can level up immediately, which it needs to do in order to actually catch up with your other Pokemon. Also, Plusle counts as a traded Pokemon in this game, meaning that since its OT is duking, Plusle actually gains boosted experience, meaning that it will level up quicker than your other Pokemon, meaning that it will actually be able to catch up a lot faster than other Pokemon that you might get later on in the game. Or even your starter, for that matter. Meaning that it's not as bad as I was making it sound, but it's still a level 13. The other thing that I need to mention is that in the not so distant future, we get an item that actually helps with leveling up Pokemon, even if you don't use them. So that will also help Plusle if you intend on using it. So, Hitmontop is a really good physical attacker with 95 attack, but that statement can be kind of misleading, mostly due to the fact that its best attacking move is Triple Kick, which is in its starting moveset. But Triple Kick, basically the way Triple Kick works is it has the ability to hit 3 times, and each of those hits goes up in power. So the first hit is 10 power, the second hit is 20 power, and the third hit is 30 power. But each of those hits are also only 90% accurate, meaning that to get all 3 hits, it is basically only a 72.9% accurate move, which isn't great. That's worse than some of the powerful moves like Fire Blast, Thunder, and Blizzard even. And it's just not great for what is basically a 60 power move. And because of that, it's simply not really a reliable way of dealing damage. The only saving grace that it has is that it is holding the black belt, meaning that since the black belt boosts the fighting type or boosts fighting type moves, it turns triple kick from a 60 base power move to a 98 power move. By turning the first hit into 16 damage, the second hit into 33 damage, and the third hit into 49 damage. Because between the black belt and the stab, it gets a 1.65 times boost to its fighting type move. But since it retains the same accuracy of about 73%, it's still not great. And because of that, it's kind of hard to recommend it for that move, and I would actually recommend it more for just using Shadow Rush. But after you are able to clear its Shadow Pokemon status, it can rely pretty heavily on TMs and gets a lot of good moves from them, actually. Moves such as Earthquake, Brick Break, and Return, which are some of the best physical moves in the game and work brilliantly on Hitmontop. Other than that, Hitmontop also has the Intimidate ability, which is simply one of the best abilities in the game because it is a double battles game. Being able to lower the attack of both of the opponent's Pokemon by one stage, which basically means halving the opponent's attack, whenever Hitmontop enters the battlefield, which effectively makes Hitmontop one of the best counters against physical type Pokemon in the game, because it has decent physical defense and it's lowering their attack, making it almost like its defense is actually multiplied by 1.5 whenever fighting against those Pokemon, which is simply really nice, honestly. So, we are no longer in the Little Leagues because Entei is the first legendary Shadow Pokemon we have seen, and is by far the highest level Shadow Pokemon we've seen, and the strongest in terms of base stat total of Shadow Pokemon we have seen. On top of that, Entei also just has a really good moveset. Having Sunny Day in its opening moveset, although it is behind Shadow Rush, so you have to wait till it's purified for that. But it also gets Flamethrower at level 51 and Solar Beam from TM, meaning that this Entei can deal pretty effectively with the ground and water types that it is weak to, just by using Sunny Day and Solar Beam. Because Sunny Day causes Solar Beam to only require one turn, which makes Entei not only one of the best fire types in the game, but probably the best stun team member in the game as well. But that's really where the positives of Entei end, because Entei's stat distribution is not great for this generation, as I've actually mentioned with several other Shadow Pokemon. But Entei specifically, its highest attacking stat is its attack, but it being a pure fire type means that all of its stab moves are going to be special attacks. And because of that, I would actually say that Typhlosion is a better fire type than Entei here, just due to the fact that Typhlosion has a higher special attack and is able to more readily use its special fire type moves in battle rather than Entei. Other than that, the only other bad things about Entei are just that it takes forever to purify it due to it having the highest heart gauge total that we have seen so far at 13,000. And to put that into perspective, the last highest we've seen was Sudowoodo, and that was only 10,000. So Entei's heart gauge is 3,000 more than Sudowoodo's, and I already said that would take ages to get through. And then the other negative I would say for Entei is that it's just a really hard Pokemon to catch due to its really low catch rate of 15. Although I will say that Entei's catch rate was actually raised in this game from 3 to 13, which I will say is a benefit because this would almost be impossible with Dakum's team if it was the 3 catch rate it was before. Ledian! And oh boy, what do I have to say about Ledian? It's all bad, if I'm being honest. Ledian is just another disappointing bug flying type. And Ledian doesn't even have the same excuse that Yanma had a couple of episodes ago, because Yanma at least gets a later evolution, or a better evolution, in later gens, and Ledian cannot say that. So let's just go through Ledian real quick, and I'll explain why it's so bad. Ledian's stats, if you look at them, it has great special defense, it has decent speed, and just bad everything else. Which means the only thing that Ledian can really reliably do is support. And even saying that is a stretch, because Ledian is level 40 right now, which means the only support move that it learns through level up is agility at level 51. And I don't know about you, but agility is a really hard sell if it's the only thing going for it. So Ledian relies pretty heavily on TMs, like for moves such as Reflect and Light Screen, to make it even usable at all. And don't even get me started on Ledian's abilities, because Ledian's two abilities are Swarm and Early Bird. And if you are dead set on using this thing, for the love of God, get Early Bird. And you might be wondering why I say that, because reading Swarm, you might be like, oh, why wouldn't I get Swarm? Getting powered up bug type moves whenever Ledian is weaker would be really nice to have. And to that, I would say, yeah, it would be really nice to have if Ledian got any bug type moves. Yeah, Ledian learns exactly 0 bug type moves from literally every method in this game. It can't learn it through level up, it can't learn it through TMs, it cannot learn any bug type moves. So, effectively, Swarm should literally read does nothing, because that's effectively what it does on Ledian. And just from saying that, it's almost the perfect way to say that Ledian might just be the worst Shadow Pokemon that we've seen so far in the entire game. And it's pretty sad at that. So, Suicune, the second of the mythical beasts, and the mythical beast of the sea. So, let's start off with the good of Suicune. Suicune has an amazing moveset. It starts with both Surf and Rain Dance, making it just really good, honestly. Having Rain Dance to boost its Surf, and Surf being a spread move, it's basically just better Chad. Or better for Alligator, if we're going with actual names. And because of that, I would say that Suicune is probably the best water type in the game. But other than that, it also learns the move Aurora Beam at level 41, which is effectively just weaker, Ice Beam, with a couple of different changes. Suicune also has great stats, making it both the tankiest and the most powerful water type in the game, due to its special attack being great and its bulk being great, allowing it to just tank attacks while being able to do a lot of damage in return. But again, kind of like Entei, that's where the good stops. And I don't say that to make Suicune sound bad, but similarly to Entei, it's really hard to catch with it only a 15 in its catch rate, and it takes forever to purify if you don't use a Time Flute on it. So it does have a couple of downsides, but if you go through those downsides, it's an amazing water type, like Gligar. And what is there to say about Gligar? It's a pretty unique typing of flying and ground, making it so it has two weaknesses in water and ice, but it also gives it two immunities to electric and ground, which actually allows it to switch into battle a lot more often than you would probably initially think, since you can switch it into basically any electric type attack or any ground type attack that you think is coming, and a lot of those are pretty easy to predict. Things such as Dig or Earthquake coming out of your opponent are pretty easy to know when they're coming. But there is a downside to its typing, and that's the fact that it gets no stab moves. like 0. And it's crazy that it gets none. But it learns 0 flying type moves through any method, so not through leveling up and not through TMs. And the only ground type move that Gligar can learn is Earthquake, which is one of the best moves in the game, if I'm being honest, but is a TM, meaning that it takes us a while to go get it, because we have to go to a specific place and do a specific thing in order to get that TM. And there's only one of them, so you have to make sure that it is the Pokemon that you want to have Earthquake has the TM. And because of that, it's kind of hard to recommend using Gligar for that specific purpose. And the other big downside to Gligar is the fact that Gligar has pretty middling stats, and that Gligar doesn't have access to Gliscor within this game. So you have to deal with those middling stats for the entire time, which is a pretty big downside if I'm being honest. And it makes Gligar struggle in the damage dealing department until you're able to give it Earthquake if you are giving it Earthquake. Because after that point, it actually does pretty good in dealing damage with just using Earthquake. So Stantler is a normal type, meaning that it gets access to a lot of different moves through TMs. Moves like Shadow Ball, Earthquake, and Iron Tail, which are really nice on it because it is actually a really decent physical attacker, which is its biggest thing going for it, actually. But other than that, it also gets Takedown in its starting moveset, which is a very decent normal type attack to start off with, being 90 power with recoil. But since it is a normal type and stab and also physical, it's a really powerful move in Stantler's hand, or hooves, I guess. But another really good thing about Stantler is the fact that Stantler has the ability Intimidate. And Intimidate, as I've gone over with Pokemon like Hitmontop, is an amazing ability, basically allowing you to lower the opponent's attack stat whenever it enters into battle. And it makes Stantler able to switch in a lot more readily than it would be able to otherwise. And that's mostly due to the fact that its defense stat is its lowest stat. So having an ability that makes that defense stat a little bit buffer, is really helpful in my opinion. But speaking of stats, Stantler is a powerful and fast Pokemon, and it makes it one of the best normal types in the game just due to those two stats in particular. I would say it's probably either 3rd or 4th in my ranking of the normal types in this game, because honestly, there's a lot more normal types in this game than other types. But you could do a lot worse than Stantler in my opinion, and that's coming from someone who wouldn't really recommend Stantler all too often. So, Piloswine is a bit of a mixed bag, and I mean that mostly due to its typing of Ice and Ground, because Ground is one of the best types in the game, with moves like Earthquake and being good against Electric and everything like that, but Ice only really serves to give it 3 extra weaknesses that Piloswine wouldn't have if it was a pure Ground type. And it also offers no new resistances, which is kind of bad for Piloswine. But somewhere where Piloswine doesn't fall short is actually its moveset, because it has an amazing moveset. It starts with both Dig and Blizzard in its starting moveset, which gives it 2 really good stab moves very quickly, which is just amazing in my opinion. But even without those 2 moves, it gets a ton of great moves through TMs as well. Moves like Earthquake, Ice Beam, and Return are all moves it can get through TMs, which are all really good upside. One of the big downsides is that Piloswine is slow, and it also has a lot less special attack than it does physical, which means its ice type moves are effectively going to be a lot weaker than its ground type moves, which is kind of another reason its ice typing holds it back. And also, with it being slow, it's a kind of a bad Pokemon to be slow, because its slow mixed with its 5 weaknesses, which makes it semi-difficult to use if you aren't careful about using it. But with that being said, it also has a held item, so even if you aren't planning on using Piloswine, I still recommend catching it, even if it's just for the fact that Piloswine is holding the Soft Sand, which powers up ground-type moves, and is an amazing held item for any Pokemon that you plan to have Earthquake on. Which, I don't think I need to say it, but I've harped on it a lot this episode. Earthquake is amazing, and Soft Sand just makes it even better. So it's just a reason to catch Piloswine, even if you aren't going for every single Shadow Pokemon. It has a Shadow Sneasel! And the best thing about Sneasel is its stats. It is a fast, frail, physical attacker, which is both the best and the worst thing about it. But let me explain what I mean by that. So, it is really fast with 115 speed, and it also has a respectable attack stat, making it so it actually can do some real damage with physical type moves. The only thing is, it is an Ice and Dark type, which, if you haven't realized yet, are 2 special types, which means it can never use its stab moves with its best attacking stat. And in fact, its special attack is its worst stat. It's so bad in the terms of fighting with its type that it's almost not even worth trying to fight it like that. Which is entirely funny to try to think about. But because of that, my main strategy that I would recommend for Sneasel is ignore its typing entirely. Use the use types that are physical on it, because it learns a lot of good moves. Like moves like Brick Break, Shadow Ball, and Iron Tail through TMs if you want it to be an attacker. But if you don't need another attacker, Sneasel being so quick is also a really big benefit for it, because it starts with Icy Wind in its starting moveset, making it one of the better speed control Pokemon in the game, since it is so fast it is going to outspeed your opponent, and Icy Wind hits both of your opponents and lowers both of their speed, basically 100% of the time. Also, if you aren't strictly using it as an attacker, Sneasel can learn moves like Sunny Day, Rain Dance, and Hail, making it a really good option for a weather team, being a really fast weather setter, allowing your other Pokemon to get the boost that they wouldn't get if you had a slower weather setter. So, say that I would have used Sneasel, I could put Rain Dance on it, have it out with Tempest, and I could Rain Dance with Sneasel because Sneasel is really fast, and Thunder with Tempest, and then Tempest's Thunder would be a guaranteed hit because Rain Dance will come out first. And it's stuff like that that you can do with Sneasel if you don't want to use it as a strict attacker. And because of that, I actually pretty highly recommend Sneasel. Aipom! And Aipom is good, but it just might be outclassed at this point in the game, and it's kind of upsetting to say that, because I really like Aipom. But Aipom's biggest upside is that it is a decently fast physical attacker, and it gets a pretty wide move pool thanks to it being a normal type. It learns a lot of moves through TM specifically. Moves like Shadow Ball, Return, Brick Break, and Iron Tail allow it to have a really diverse moveset. The only bad thing is that Aipom is built like a paper bag. If it is hit by anything that is even slightly strong, it will fold immediately. And you can probably see up in the corner where the gameplay is that I only bit it and it's already almost at half health. It's crazy how frail this Pokemon is. And it's the weirdest thing about Aipom is that it gives it Baton Pass, and the game, for some reason, is obsessed with giving Shadow Pokemon Baton Pass when the only move that they can learn that takes advantage of Baton Pass is Agility. And I know I've said this before, but I'll say it again. if the only upside to a Pokemon is agility, it is a pretty hard sell for me. Also, I should mention that Aipom is only able to be an Aipom in this game because we're in Gen 3. And Ambipom does not exist, so it is something to keep in mind for Aipom specifically. Oh, Murkrow is interesting. To start off, this is not the Murkrow that you are probably thinking of, since Murkrow is actually known for being really good in VGC, which is the official doubles competitive format. But like I said, this Murkrow is not that Murkrow, since it doesn't have a lot of the tools that the Murkrow that VGC players use in present day. Specifically, things like Tailwind. This Murkrow just doesn't get access to. But with that being said, let's talk about Murkrow in this game. It has a relatively high attack, special attack, and speed stat, making it actually a pretty good mixed attacker. And it actually gets a few good moves to back it up. It starts with both Feint Attack and Fly, which gives it 2 decent stab moves very quickly. But with it being level 43 when we are snagging it, it literally gets no more moves through level up. Which means it's entirely reliant on TMs in order for its moveset to expand past what you are seeing in the bio. But even with TMs, Murkrow can't really learn all that many moves. In terms of attack, it's really only Return and Shadow Ball that it gets. And in terms of support, you can teach it Rain Dance, Sunny Day, and Toxic. So really, it's not the greatest Pokemon in terms of moves, but if you really want to use it, it is actually pretty decent in terms of being a support Pokemon with, like I said, moves like Rain Dance if you have a Rain team, or Sunny Day if you have a Sun team, or even just giving it Toxic and letting it be a really fast Toxic user is really nice, just to give it the ability to do something if you plan on using it. The real downside is that there are other dark types if you want to use dark types, and there are other flying types if you want to use flying types, and Murkrow is probably the worst in both of those categories in this game. So it's just a real downside to it, honestly. Also, similarly to all of the other Gen 4 evolutions that I've brought up, Murkrow does not have Honchkrow in this game, so it is strictly a Murkrow if you are planning to use it. In Fortress, and if you wanted to use a literal iron wall of a Pokemon, Fortress is your Pokemon. Because just look at those stats. It has 140 defense, meaning that Fortress can basically live any physical hit that you throw at it, which is just honestly impressive in my opinion. Along with its really massive defense stat, Fortress is also a Bug Steel type, in fact the only Bug Steel type in the game, meaning that it only has one weakness, and that is to fire. So as long as you keep Fortress away from the flames, it should probably be fine. But those two upsides that I just talked about end up also being Fortress's biggest downside. Because if you are planning to use Fortress, you need to know that since it is honestly a defensive monster, it is only really good at doing that and nothing else. It's really not that strong of a Pokemon in the offensive capabilities. With its only real means of doing damage in its starting moveset being Explosion, which kind of takes away from it being a tank because it faints alongside doing that. And you might be thinking, well, it has 90 attack, so it could do some good damage, which I would argue, yeah, you would be correct. If it learned good moves, that is. The only damage dealing moves that it can learn through any sort are Earthquake, Return, and Hyper Beam. And Earthquake is probably something you wouldn't want to put on a fully defensive Pokemon. Ice Beam, or not Ice Beam, Hyper Beam requires it to have a recharge turn, which honestly isn't the biggest deal for Fortress because it will live a lot of turns, but it's something to keep in mind. And then Return requires it to be friendly towards you, so it does take a little bit for you to actually get the friendship up for Return to be a good move. The only real argument I would have for using Fortress in this game is that it is a double battle game, meaning that Fortress doesn't actually need to be the one dealing the damage in order for you to be effective in a battle. It can literally just be a switch-in Pokemon to take a hit so you can heal, or to allow you to pivot around to have better synergy in your battles, or even just to be a Pokemon to Toxic and Protect forever, which is really good for that, by the way. But it, like I said, just keep in mind, it can't do a lot of damage on its own. In Ariados, and I have to just say this right up front, this Ariados should have been with the other guard in the under. Because it is the counterpart to the Ledian that the other guard had, and it would have actually allowed the under to have more than a single Shadow Pokemon in it proper, and allowed for a second option of a bug type between Dakum and Venus. But with that being said, let's talk about Ariados in itself, because honestly, if it was an option, I still probably wouldn't recommend it because it's not great. It is a bug and poison type, making it strong against 3 different types, being grass, psychic, and dark. Although that can be pretty misleading, mostly due to the fact that it actually is weak to psychic, so it only actually has 2 positive interactions with types being grass and dark type. So you have to keep that in mind if you are planning on using Ariados. Also, on top of that, Ariados is just kind of weird in the move pool department. It starts with Sludge Bomb, which is a great move on Ariados because it is basically just the best poison type move in the game, and Ariados actually has decent physical attack. But other than that, the only other move that it learns through leveling up is Psychic, which is super weird because it has really no connection to the Psychic type, and also its special attack is awful. So it using Psychic just isn't great on it at all. Other than that, the only other physical moves that it can learn through TMs are Return and Hyper Beam, meaning that you're kind of relying on Sludge Bomb and maybe Hyper Beam to do most of the damage or most of the work for Ariados, which isn't the greatest spot to be for Ariados, honestly. But there is something positive I could say about Ariados that I couldn't say about Ledian before it. It's that Swarm on Ariados is actually something that it can use because it gets Leech Life in its starting moveset. Which is the only bug-type move it can actually learn, or only bug-type damaging move it can actually learn. And Leech Life is pitifully weak, but it's still a bug-type move, so it still counts. Granbull is possibly the strongest normal type in the entire game. It has a monstrous 120 attack, making it just incredibly powerful. It also has an amazing moveset, starting with Strength in its opening moveset, which I praised on Furret, and Furret is not nearly have the power that this thing has. Also, it has the ability of upgrading to Return once it becomes more friendly, basically taking a 102 power move, which effectively becomes a 153 power move in Granbull's hand, which is an incredible power for a single Pokemon to wield, honestly. It could also get a bunch of great TMs. Moves like Shadow Ball, Earthquake, Sludge Bomb, Iron Tail, and Brick Break, meaning that Granbull can actually fill basically any type gap that you may have had on your team, making it a really good choice if you are missing a type, or if you're weak against a type and need something to cover it, or if you just need a little bit of extra coverage on your team, Granbull is an amazing choice, specifically for that. Also, on top of that even, Granbull has Intimidate, which means that when it is sent out, it lowers the attack of its opponents, making it a really good option for teams that are a little bit weaker in the defensive aspects, because it allows you to have a Pokemon that lowers the attack of your opponents, buffing up basically the defense of all of your Pokemon. And it's really nice to have, and I praised it on lesser Pokemon, so of course it's great on Granbull. The only real downside that Granbull has is that it's slow. It only has 45 speed, which means that due to it being a semi-frail Pokemon, a strong hit could really unexpectedly take it out and make it a little bit harder to make it switch into battles more smoothly than you may initially think. But I have to once again bring up the Intimidate. It does make it slightly easier. In Vibrava! And Vibrava and from their Flygon are easily some of the best Pokemon in the game, mostly due to their typing of Dragon and Ground type being both offensively and defensively really good. And for offenses, I really only have to say 2 words, and those 2 words are Stab, Earthquake. This thing probably has the most powerful Earthquake that you can give any single Pokemon in this entire game, and it is fantastic at using it. I would honestly recommend just using it for Earthquake, honestly, because that is how strong it is with just that move. And if we are talking defensively, Flygon/Vibrava only have 2 weaknesses to Ice and Dragon type, which are fairly rare types, especially in attacking moves. It also comes with 3 resistances to Fire, Poison, and Rock, as well as 2 immunities to Electric and Ground, thanks to its ability of Levitate. But with talking about Vibrava, I do actually have to bring up its move pool, because while Vibrava's typing and the use of Earthquake are really good, the rest of its move pool options are really rough, if I'm being honest. And to show that, it really only gets Sand Tomb through leveling up. In fact, it's in its opening moveset. And other than that, the only other physical move that it learns through leveling up is Hyper Beam at level 57. So it relies almost exclusively on TMs. But even with saying that, the only real TMs that it learns are Earthquake, Return, and Iron Tail, and it can only learn Iron Tail after it evolves, so you have to wait for it to actually become a Flygon in order for you to actually get access to the Iron Tail to add on to its type effectiveness or coverage moves. But if you want to expand it a little bit, you can add special attacks onto Flygon, because Flygon's special attack is only 20 points lower than its physical attack, and I think because of that, it actually makes it a decently good mixed attacker, instead of being a purely physical attacker. And because of that, it can actually learn some good moves, like Solar Beam and Flamethrower and Dragon Claw through TM, making it actually pretty potent in its range of coverage moves that it can actually get, making it actually a really good Pokemon, even outside of just using Earthquake every turn. So, Shadow Raikou is the last of the legendary beasts, and easily the best in terms of offenses. But let me explain what I mean by that. It has 115 in both its special attack and its speed, making this thing insanely good at using its electric type attacks, because it allows it to outspeed and just hit basically everything really hard with its stab electric type moves. With the only exception obviously being ground types that are immune to electric type moves. But that's kind of a flaw about Raikou as well, because it really can only get electric type moves in terms of special attacks, with the only exception, and when I say only, I mean only, being Crunch at level 61, which is so far away from level 40, it's not even funny. But because of that, it actually makes Raikou somewhat of a one-trick pony of sorts. Or, I guess in its case, a one-trick dog. But if you don't want to use it for a fast special attacker, it can actually also be really good in a fast support slot, because it can learn moves such as Toxic and Sunny Day, Rain Dance, which is actually in its starting moveset, Reflect and Sandstorm. And because it can learn so many weather-setting moves, it is one of the best weather setters in the entire game if you are planning to have a dedicated weather team. Because even if you have something like a Sun team or a Sands team, having a fast setter is just good for those teams because it allows you to get the benefits faster than you would be able to do if you had, say, a slower member using those moves. But with that being said, Raikou does have one humongous weakness, and I already semi-mentioned it. It's ground type, because honestly, Raikou can't really do anything against ground type. With its only attacks being electric type moves, it makes it really hard for it to do anything against ground types, as well as the fact that it is weak to those very ground types, and the proliferance, or the prevalence of Earthquake throughout the game makes it so that Raikou is actually really difficult to kind of keep on the battlefield for a long time, just because of how many Pokemon in the late game get Earthquake and like to spam it over and over and over again. It's just something to keep in mind if you are planning to use Raikou, but even with that said, I would probably still call it the best electric type in the game. He has Sunflora, which is kind of hard to suggest anyone to use, honestly. And it's mostly due to it being a fairly frail and slow pure grass type, which doesn't do it any good in terms of basically anything. It being a pure grass type means it has 5 weaknesses to pretty common attacking types. It only has one attacking move, being Solar Beam, and it only gets access to one other special attack, being Giga Drain. So you have to weigh your options between a move that will always take 2 turns to do, basically no matter what Sunflora does, or a move that is only 60 power and doesn't really have any benefits to make that better. And the reason I say Solar Beam will always take 2 turns to do is because you can either just use Solar Beam, in which case it just takes the charge turn and then it goes off, which is 2 turns, or Sunflora also gets Sunny Day, which allows it to effectively make Solar Beam 1 turn, but because it has to use Sunny Day anyway, it still takes the first 2 turns to do. So no matter what you do, as long as you are using Sunflora, it takes 2 turns for it to actually use a move at the start of battle, which isn't great at all, honestly. But other than that, like I said, the only other move it can learn that would be any helpful to it is Giga Drain, and even with the benefit of healing, it isn't really helpful since the healing is based off the damage, and Sunflora isn't really the damage-dealing Pokemon. And honestly, there's been better options for grass type before this point. So if you are still looking for a Pokemon to use and you really want to use a grass type, I still just recommend using one of the good grass types or decent grass types that were before this point in the game. Oh, Delibird! What do I have to say about it? Well, instead of actually going into my normal spiel like I would normally do for Shadow Pokemon, I want to just read Smogon's description of Delibird instead. So, Smogon reads, it has bad stats, a poor move pool, and a type combo that gives it many weaknesses to common attacks. Throughout the game, you will find that Delibird is easily countered, and any job that you want it to do will probably be done better by something else. And you want to know something that's even funnier than just reading that? That's an overview of Gen 4 Delibird, meaning that this Delibird is even worse off because of the physical special split not being here, and also moves not existing that are really good on it. Or not really good on it, but are better on it. There is one saving grace for Delibird, however, and that is the fact that Delibird is holding the Never Melt Ice. Basically meaning that I would recommend to catch it, not to use it because it's not good, but to actually be able to power up your other Ice-type Pokemon, because the Never Melt Ice powers up Ice-type moves. So if you are using an Ice-type on your team, catching this Delibird is a good thing, because it just allows you to get the Never Melt Ice off of it in order to give it to a different Pokemon. Which, yes, is very funny to actually think about, just catching this bird to be like, no, I don't want to use the bird. Give me that ice, though. Heracross. And Heracross here is an amazing last-minute addition to any team. And it is mostly due to that amazing 125 attack stat, making it one of the best physical attackers in the game, and making it just incredibly powerful. And with the combination of both Brick Break and Mega Horn as stab physical moves that it has, it makes this thing a real physical monster. On top of those moves, it can also learn Earthquake and Hyper Beam through TM, which really helps to round out its moveset and makes it almost virtually impossible for any type in the game to fully resist it, making it even better. But the real thing that Heracross has going for it is its ability. Specifically, the Guts ability is incredible, because what Guts does is it allows Heracross to multiply its attack stat by 1.5 times whenever it is status. And since this is a double battle game, it means that you can target your own Pokemon, and you can target them with status moves, whether that be Thunder Wave, Stun Spore, or Will-O-Wisp, which is actually the best move to use on Heracross, because it means you can purposely give it a status effect, guaranteeing that Guts activates every single battle in the game. So effectively, a Heracross with the Guts ability can have an attack stat of 188 every single battle in the game. And that is the highest attack stat out of every Pokemon in the whole game by over 50 points. This thing is a monster and would fit on almost any team, and is probably the one Pokemon in the late game here that I can highly recommend slotting into your team if you don't have a full team of 6 at this point. So Skarmory is a defensive monster. It has a defense stat that is tied with Fortress for the highest defense stat in the entire game out of every Shadow Pokemon. But even with that defense stat, it also is decently strong and fast, with 80 in its attack and 70 in its speed, meaning that it can reliably outspeed and cause some good damage against a lot of opponents that you will face. But even when it cannot do that, it's tanky enough to take a few hits, so it's not really a problem if you have to allow it to take a couple of hits in order to deal the damage you want it to. It is also holding the Sharp Beak to even boost its flying type moves a little further, allowing it to cause a little bit of extra damage if 80 attack or if 80 base attack isn't enough. The biggest downside about Skarmory is that Skarmory doesn't get any moves. It gets basically what you see is what you get with Skarmory. It gets Drill Peck and Steel Wing, which are its best moves, and it's in its starting moveset. Which again, it's not terrible, but it just doesn't get any other options. Also, the other thing that Skarmory is normally known for is hazard effect, or entry hazard. But this Skarmory is unfortunately too high level to get spikes, which is the one it's usually known for. So that is not an option in this particular game. But if you are looking for a final team member this late into the journey, you could do a lot worse than this Skarmory here, in all honesty. Miltank! Miltank is a more defensively geared Granbull, is the best way I can put it. Because it has lower attack and special attack, but it has higher stats in literally every other one. Which means, if you don't like Granbull because of its frailness, then you might like Miltank, since it can take a lot more damage and a lot more hit, and live a lot longer. Miltank also has a decent move pool, with moves like Milk Drink, Rollout, and Stomp in its starting moveset, and moves like Return, Earthquake, Brick Break, Shadow Ball, and Hyper Beam, all from TMs, making Miltank a really flexible Pokemon in what roles it can fulfill on your team. But with saying that, there is one big issue that every single Shadow Pokemon that is here is going to suffer from, and that's just that you can't really reasonably use them during the story, because these are the final fights of the game, because we are literally fighting these to get to Nazcor. So there's no breaks or anything to go get the Shadow Pokemon or to switch anything out or really use them at all, meaning that you just can't use them. There is, of course, the post-game and stuff like that make them at least semi-usable, but because you have to wait till the post-game to even get access to them, it's kind of hard to even recommend them at all. Shadow Absol! And Absol is such a cool designed Pokemon, but it's just the pure definition of dissonance. And what I mean by that is that Absol has an amazing attack stat of 130, which, to put that into perspective, Medicham has 120 attack, and that's with it being doubled by pure power. So Absol has 10 more power points in its attack than Medicham has, which should just show you how powerful Absol is with its physical attack. But the problem is that Absol is a pure dark type, meaning it can never use that amazing attack stat with its stab moves at all. And on top of that, even its move pool is also heavily geared towards special moves, rather than being geared towards physical moves that would make it really good to be able to use. And to prove that, I'm actually going to list every single one of the physical moves that Absol can learn in this entire game. So, starting off, we get Slash, which is in its opening moveset, then Return, Iron Tail, Shadow Ball, and finally Hyper Beam. And that's it! Yeah, it learns a whole 5 physical moves, and really it's only 4 physical moves because having both Slash and Return is redundant. So your moveset will likely be something like Sword Stance, Slash, Iron Tail, and Shadow Ball, which isn't a bad moveset, but it's just really limiting in what Absol can actually do with its moves so limited. And if I'm being honest, I would say Absol has enough to be called a good Pokemon within this game, because Sword Stance, Iron Tail, and Shadow Ball is good coverage at the very least. But being caught here in the Temu Elite Four, which means we aren't even able to use it until the post game, makes it really hard to actually recommend. And at this point, I would say that it's probably just too late to actually use. Boom. So, Houndoom is actually the first of these Shadow Pokemon that I can at least somewhat recommend. And that is mostly due to the fact that it is a Dark and Fire type with a high special attack stat, which it's kind of sad that that is where the floor is for recommending the Pokemon. But it is literally the only Dark type in the game with a high special attack stat that is over 85. So that should give you a perspective on that at least. Also, it has moves that are key to a stun team member, which makes it really good on stun teams, with moves like Sunny Day and Solar Beam that can be taught through TM, and moves like Flamethrower that it has through its starting moveset, as well as Crunch, which it gets through leveling up. And I would say that if you want a Fire or a Dark type for the post-game or for side things that we haven't gone over yet, that you could probably do a lot worse than this Houndoom, in all honesty, is Tropius. And honestly, Tropius is probably the worst of the entire lot of Shadow Pokemon that we've talked about so far. And it is due to Tropius just having fairly middling stats for being a fully evolved Pokemon. Tropius' stats are so evenly distributed across them that it doesn't actually excel in literally anything. Which means it has no stat over 100, with its HP at 99 being its highest stat, so it just misses that benchmark. Tropius also doesn't really get any good moves, with Solar Beam and Fly in its starting moveset, and then Earthquake from TMs, but it really doesn't have the attack stats to take advantage of those moves, with its attacking stats being only 72 and lower, which makes Tropius kind of hard to recommend for any attacking type style if you're trying to use that. So it ends up with Tropius being a really cool design that just can't keep up with the other Pokemon that we have seen so far. But a terrifying Shadow Metagross. So, you probably thought that the Legendary Beasts were the best Shadow Pokemon in the game. But let me introduce you to pseudo-legendary Shadow Pokemon. Yeah, this Metagross is absolutely a menace. And it is because it has the highest natural attack stat in the game at 135. Only being beaten out by Heracross if it has Guts and is status. That is the only Pokemon that can beat Metagross in the attacking stat. And that is also paired with an amazing special attack stat of 95, which is also just a really good, which makes Metagross just a really good special attacker, which is really nice because Metagross just learns a stupid amount of good moves. It has Hyper Beam and Psychic in its starting moveset. It gets Meteor Mash at the level 55, which is not far off from where you get it, which is a really good Steel-type move. And then it gets Earthquake Return, Shadow Ball, Brick Break, and Sludge Bomb all through TMs, meaning that this Metagross is really versatile, and you can make it pretty much however you want, and it's really good pretty much no matter what moves you get it. And also, if you for some reason didn't want to make this monster of a Metagross an attacker, it also gets several special or support moves that don't strictly do damage. So moves like Light Screen, Reflect, Rain Dance, Sunny Day, Sandstorm, and Toxic are all support moves that this Metagross can learn, which makes it really good on any weather team, especially Sandstorm because it's a Steel type. And with Reflect and Light Screen, it can basically support any team that you have, and is an amazing Pokemon to get if you want to use it for the post-game and for other things outside of just the post-game. The only downside of this Metagross is that it has the highest heart gauge that we have seen so far, and it's actually larger than all of the legendary beasts. And to match that, it also has a catch rate to match that, which is 15. So it is also equally as hard to catch as all of the legendary beasts. So it's just something to keep in mind while trying to catch this Metagross. Come on, Shadow Tyranitar. Starting off, I want to just give my biggest recommendation off right now. This Shadow Tyranitar is the one I was alluding to last battle, being the hardest Shadow Pokemon to catch in the game. So I recommend just Master Ball it. Get it out of the way, it makes this fight so much easier. But to talk about Tyranitar specifically, It being based off of Godzilla makes a lot of sense because this Tyranitar is a monster. It has amazing stats with 100 or more in every stat besides speed. And with it being this strong, it being slower than some Pokemon isn't even that bad. And also, its 70-something speed stat isn't even that bad to begin with when comparing it to several other Shadow Pokemon we have seen so far. It also has an incredibly vast move pool to use with those amazing stats, with moves like Crunch, Rock Slide, Thunder, and Blizzard in its starting moveset, learning moves like Earthquake and Hyper Beam through leveling up at level 61 and 75 respectively, and then having an absurd amount of damage-dealing moves through TM. Moves like Dragon Claw, Ice Beam, Iron Tail, Thunderbolt, Return, Brick Break, Flamethrower, and Fire Blast can all be taught to this thing through TM, making it absolutely insane with the versatility that Tyranitar can get. Also, if you have a Sand team, Tyranitar is a no-brainer to go on it, due to its ability of Sandstream, which basically whenever it goes onto the battlefield, it sets up Sandstorm automatically, basically boosting up, or basically giving your Sand team the sand that it desperately craves, without having to sacrifice a move slot for Sandstorm. The only real downside that Tyranitar has is it has the highest heart gauge meter in the entire game, as well as the lowest catch rate in the entire game. But honestly, both of those can be sidestepped by using the Master Ball to catch it automatically, and by using the Time Flute to completely avoid the massive heart gauge number. Meaning that with just 2 items, you can make the most powerful Pokemon your own. Smeargle is a very gimmicky Pokemon, if I'm being honest. It literally only learns one move outside of its starting moveset, and that move is Sketch. And it learns it at level 51, 61, 71, 81, and 91. So basically, every 10 levels, it will learn another Sketch, which is both a good and a bad thing for it, because Sketch is basically the best and worst move in every single game that it is in. And the reason I say that is because the way Sketch works is that when a move is used against a Sketch Pokemon, that Pokemon can use Sketch and copy the last move of the Pokemon that Sketch is used on. So say Tempest here, my Ampharos, uses Thunderbolt on the Smeargle. If the Smeargle would live and then use Sketch, it would then gain Thunderbolt as a permanent move on its moveset, taking over the place of the Sketch slot. Think of it like Copycat, except Sketch is a permanent move, while Copycat is only temporary during the battle. But since it is a permanent move, it means Smeargle technically has the widest moveset of any Pokemon in the game, because it can literally learn any move. And if you wanted to use a Smeargle, the best thing I would say to use it for is to copy your own Pokemon's move. Because this is a double battle game, you can use a move with a faster Pokemon, and then have Smeargle sketch the faster Pokemon, and get the move that it just used permanently, which can be great. It can give it stuff like Earthquake if you really wanted that. If a Pokemon has Spore, Spore is amazing on Smeargle, and it can just get a great supportive moveset just by doing that, and that's the best upside of Smeargle. The only downside of Smeargle is pretty much everything else. Smeargle has terrible stats, so any offensive move, it's not really going to get any use out of, and it is also a pure normal type, which means unless you are sketchy normal type moves, it's almost never going to get stab on any of the sketch moves. Plus, because Smeargle is found so late in the game, it's almost impossible for me to recommend it without very heavy devotion to getting a super good supportive moveset. And Ursaring! And Ursaring here is what I would call the only competition that Heracross has as the best physical attacker in the game. And what I mean by that is that Ursaring has a base attack stat of 130. And it always has the Guts ability, meaning that if you can get its status, which is very easy to do in a double battle, it goes from 130 attack power to 195, which is one of the highest, if not the highest, in the game. And you can get it basically every battle for free. It also gets several great physical attacks with moves like Return, Earthquake, Hyper Beam, and Brick Break, giving it pretty good versatility for being just a regular physical attacking normal type. Its biggest downside, however, is that it is fairly slow and semi-frail, which means it's very hard to get into battle safely. Because if you send it into battle against a Pokemon attacking it, it can very easily take too much damage and then get outsped and knocked out before it can take proper advantage of its attack power. Or if you have it out, it can also just be outsped and O-code, or one-hit KO'd, before it's able to take proper advantage of its attack power still. And because of that, it's a lot easier to use with supportive Pokemon to kind of boost up its defenses to make it a lot easier for it to become the powerhouse that it's supposed to be. I will say that Ursaring here is the one and probably the only Shadow Pokemon in the post-game that I can highly recommend using if you do not have a full party or if you want to switch out Pokemon during the post-game. Because Ursaring is by far the best and most versatile of every single Pokemon that we have seen up to this point in the post-game, and for the rest of the post-game, if I'm being honest. So, Shuckle is the most min-max Pokemon of all time, having stats that are either over 200 or less than 30, with literally no in-between. It's actually kind of crazy. But that is actually the biggest problem with Shuckle, is that its only stats that are over 30, and in fact are 230, are its defenses, making it a purely defensive Pokemon. But that also means that Shuckle cannot really do any direct damage and really has to focus on moves like Toxic or Confuse Ray and stuff like that in order to be able to do really anything to any Pokemon. And before anyone brings it up, I know there are ways to make Shuckle like a god tier Pokemon and make it do literally like the most damage any Pokemon has ever done before using the move Power Trick and a few other setup moves. But the problem is, those aren't in this game, so it doesn't relate to this Shuckle, and it means that this Shuckle is relegated to purely being a stall Pokemon. But to be fair, it's pretty good at using stall tactics, and if you are planning on wanting to use this Shuckle for Mount Battle or anything like that, the moveset I would recommend is Toxic, Sandstorm, Double Team, and Protect, which really allows you to be super annoying against your opponents. So take that moveset and have good luck. So Togetic can be a pretty decent support Pokemon, where it can use the Ring Brace to allow it to spread around statuses and lower its opponent's stat more reliably than it would be able to otherwise, with moves like Flamethrower, Steel Wing, Psychic, and Shadow Ball being really good moves if it has the Ring Grace. And it also gains access to several really good non-damaging support moves. Moves like Light Screen, Reflect, Safeguard, Wish, and Follow Me, which can go a long way at making your other Pokemon even more powerful, even if Togetic itself is not that good at causing direct damage. On top of that, Togetic also has alright defenses, which allows it to live just long enough to get those moves out to support the rest of your team. But unfortunately, none of that matters, since it's level 20! I don't know what went through the developers' brains to make this thing level 20. It makes any advantage that you could get out of Togetic null and void, since it takes so much time to make a level 20 Pokemon all the way up to level like 65 where we're at to get it even close to use with your other team members. And that's not even to mention that this is literally the last real thing that there is to do in the story mode. Meaning that we're catching this Togetic, and that's basically it. If you want to use Togetic, you either have to seek out rematches, you have to go do Mount Battle a whole bunch more for random items, or you have to do side stuff outside of the main story. It's just asinine that they made it level 20, and because of that, I cannot recommend it. Is Jirachi in the American or the English bonus disc, and the obtainment method is actually absurdly easy. The only requirements are that you have an English version of Ruby or Sapphire, and I believe it has to be specifically Ruby or Sapphire, because I don't believe Emerald actually works for this Jirachi. And you have to have the English bonus disc, and that's basically it. You have to get the Ruby and Sapphire game to the first Pokemon Center, and then you're able to transfer the Jirachi from the bonus disc to the GBA game using a GameCube to GBA link cable. And the reason I say this is so easy is because you don't even need Colosseum, which, again, just makes this by far the easiest obtainment method. And on top of that, since you only have to get to the first Pokemon Center, it means that it is completely possible to go through an entire playthrough with this Jirachi, and on top of that, this Jirachi is sent to the GBA game at level 5. So, this Jirachi is one of the best Pokemon for a Hoenn playthrough. It has amazing stats with immediate 100 base stats in every single stat, which makes it basically very good for a good chunk of the entire game. And it also has an amazing move pool that is just amplified by the fact that it has Serene Grace as its ability. So it gets Psychic at level 20, which is amazing, being super low level and way before you would get the TM. And it also gets several great TM moves like Thunderbolt, Shadow Ball, Water Pulse, and Secret Power, basically making this Jirachi very versatile for a Hoenn playthrough, if you would want to use it in Gen 3 Hoenn. Also, on top of that, being a Steel Psychic type is just an amazing type on top of everything else I've talked about. So, Jirachi is probably one of the best Pokemon you could get from this entire game. But next up is Pikachu, and yeah, it's weird that Pikachu is with Jirachi, or after Jirachi, I guess I should say. But Pikachu is only from the Japanese bonus disc, and the obtainment method for getting this Pikachu is you have to get the Mount Battle and you have to defeat Dakum, and then you have to get 5,000 Poke Coupons from Mount Battle. And it is only available, like I said, with the Japanese bonus disc on a Japanese version of Pokemon Colosseum on a Japanese GameCube. So it's a lot of very specific things that you have to have in order to get this Pikachu. But unlike the Jirachi, the Pikachu can actually either be sent to the Colosseum save file or to a GBA game. So it actually has more options of where it can be sent. But other than the unique way of getting this Pikachu, it's really just a normal Pikachu. I mean, it gets access to the Light Ball when it's traded to either the Colosseum or the GBA game, which doubles Pikachu's special attack stat in this generation. So it's actually a decent Pikachu, all things considered. But because of the Light Ball, you have to decide if you want to keep a really frail Pokemon that only has a slight boost to its special attack, or a Raichu that has less special attack and can do less damage overall, but can very much take more hits. And I would say that if you stick with Pikachu, it's mostly locked to just electric type moves, since its physical attack is just trash. But if you go with the Raichu route, I would wait until level 26, because that is when it gets Thunderbolt, and then you can use TMs like Iron Tail, Return, Dig, and Brick Break to really make Raichu this mix attacker that it wants to be. But the last Pokemon that we are going to be talking about from the bonus disc is Celebi. And Celebi is absolutely absurd to get. It can be received after snagging and purifying all 48 Shadow Pokemon in the game. So basically, you have to beat all of Pokemon Colosseum to get this Celebi. It is also only in the Japanese version of the game, only on Japanese systems, and it has to be connected to the Japanese bonus disc. But in exchange for all of that work, you get one Celebi for purifying all of the Shadow Pokemon that you can put into the Colosseum game, and then you get an extra 48 Celebis that can be sent to basically any of the GBA games. But the only stipulation, or the only restriction, is that it's only one per save file. So, you basically just become a Celebi distributor at that point. And I will say, Celebi is just another great mythical Pokemon, being the second strongest psychic type in the game, right behind Espeon in terms of power. But I will say that Celebi's biggest weakness is that it does not have the best move pool to speak of. It only learns 2 direct damaging moves through level up, being Confusion, which it actually starts with, and Ancient Power. And then it relies pretty heavily on TMs for moves like Psychic, Shadow Ball, Hyper Beam, Solar Beam, and Return. And if you don't want to use those TMs because they're too valuable, I would say the best option for Celebi is actually being a supportive Pokemon, because it could also learn moves like Reflect, Light Screen, and all of the weather setting moves, making it an amazing team member, actually specifically on Sun teams, weirdly enough. But since the only requirement to get Celebi is to purify all 48 Shadow Pokemon, it means that this Celebi can actually be available to use on this climb up Mount Battle, which is a massive upside for the Celebi, and immediately shoots it up from the viability that it would have had otherwise. As Ho-Oh, who is the ultimate reward for conquering Colosseum. So in order for Ho-Oh to appear here, you need to beat the main story of Colosseum, snag and purify all 48 Shadow Pokemon in the game, and complete this Mount Battle vs 100 challenge in the battle mode of Colosseum. And that is without switching your team around at all during your climb up the mountain. But for completing all of those requirements, you get an absolute powerhouse of a Pokemon. This Ho-Oh is obtained at level 70, which means it is only 7 levels away from learning Mystic Fire, which was Ho-Oh's signature move when it was first introduced. And it was a strong signature move at that, being a 100 power fire type move that has a 50% chance to inflict burn, being a more reliable option than Fire Blast, since it has 95 accuracy instead of 75, and it makes Ho-Oh a pretty mean physical counter as well, since burn cuts a Pokemon's attack stat in half. Other than that, you can pretty much make Ho-Oh whatever you want, because with a 130 attack stat and a 110 special attack stat, Ho-Oh can basically use any move you give it, and oh boy, does it get access to a lot of moves. Between Ancient Power, Hyper Beam, Solar Beam, Thunderbolt, Earthquake, Psychic, and even Shadow Ball, this thing is probably the most versatile Pokemon in the entire game. But with that being said, it does have one big downside. And that's being that it is literally the last thing that you can get in the game. We've done everything within Colosseum, meaning that unless you want to use Ho-Oh to grind some Poke coupons in Mount Battle for some reason, there's really not much else for it to do. But in reality, this Ho-Oh is specifically just a real novelty. So if you are able to get this Ho-Oh, I would say that's an accomplishment in and of itself.